For millennia, Jerusalem has remained at the center of the most important prophecies in human history. Far beyond its ancient walls and stone streets, this city carries the weight of an extraordinary destiny that transcends religions, cultures, and epochs. From the first temple built by Solomon to the promised return of the Messiah on the Mount of Olives, every stone of this sacred city seems to whisper secrets of a preordained future that is unfolding before our eyes. What if we were living the final moments of an ancient prophecy? What if, at this very moment, preparations for the return of Jesus were happening in Jerusalem, silently, while the world remains distracted with its daily concerns? Jerusalem is not just any city. While other ancient cities have risen and fallen, losing their relevance over time, Jerusalem remains as a spiritual beacon that spans millennia. From its first mentions in sacred scriptures to today's news, this city refuses to disappear into the annals of history. Why? Because its destiny is intertwined with the very destiny of humanity, as if each event in the city's history were carefully orchestrated by divine hands. Think about it. What other city in the world has been destroyed and rebuilt countless times, disputed by empires, religions, and armies, and still remains a center of devotion for billions of people? It is not by chance that three of the world's major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, consider Jerusalem sacred. It is as if this city had been designated from the beginning to be the stage where the final drama of human history will unfold. The Bible contains 735 prophecies about future events, and an impressive 81% of them have already been fulfilled exactly as predicted. Many of these prophecies are directly related to Jerusalem. In 70 after Christ, the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans, exactly as Jesus had prophesied decades earlier. This catastrophic event marked the beginning of almost 2 millennia of exile of the Jewish people from their homeland, another event clearly predicted in the scriptures. In 1948, something that many considered impossible occurred. Israel re-emerged as a nation after almost 2,000 years. What other people maintained their cultural, religious, and linguistic identity after 2 millennia dispersed among the nations? None. And just 19 years later, in 1967, during the Six-Day War, Jerusalem returned to Israeli control, another prophetic milestone fulfilled before the eyes of the modern world. We are not talking about vague coincidences, but specific events predicted centuries or even millennia in advance. Have you ever wondered why such a small city, without natural ports, without major natural resources, and without significant trade routes became the epicenter of so many conflicts throughout history? The answer transcends geopolitics. Zechariah chapter 12 verse 3 tells us, "On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves severely." This prophecy is being fulfilled before our eyes as powerful nations break their teeth trying to resolve the Jerusalem question. King David established Jerusalem as the capital 3,000 years ago, and since then, 187 generations have witnessed the fulfillment of prophecies in this city. The name Jerusalem appears 811 times in the sacred scriptures, more than any other city. Even its name carries prophetic meaning, City of Peace, an ironic name for a place that has seen so many wars, but which points to its final destiny as the throne of the Prince of Peace. Archaeological excavations in Jerusalem continually confirm the historical accuracy of biblical narratives. From the City of David to the ruins of the Second Temple, each unearthed stone echoes the words of the ancient prophets. In 2015, archaeologists discovered the personal seal of King Hezekiah mentioned in Isaiah, further tangible evidence of the historical accuracy of the scriptures. But Jerusalem is not just a museum of past prophecies, it is the stage for prophecies that are unfolding now. As we walk through the streets of Jerusalem today, we step on layers of history that have witnessed the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, but we also feel the palpable tension of prophecies not yet fulfilled. It is as if the city were holding its breath, waiting for the next act of this divine drama. And today, more than ever, we see signs that this next act is about to begin. For more than 2 millennia, a crucial piece has been missing in Jerusalem: the Holy Temple. Since the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans, traditional Judaism has yearned for the rebuilding of this divine sanctuary. And now, after 2,000 years, preparations for the Third Temple are underway, a reality that few could have imagined just a few decades ago. What we are witnessing in Jerusalem today is not just another chapter in the long history of an ancient city. It is the convergence of prophetic lines that were established millennia ago and that now seem to be coming together in our generation. But to fully understand the significance of these events, we need to take a closer look at the preparations for the Third Temple, a catalyst for the final events that will lead to the return of the Messiah. The Third Temple is not just another religious building. It is the key that will trigger apocalyptic events predicted millennia ago. Unlike previous temples, this one will not be built merely as a place of worship, but as a cosmic catalyst that will accelerate the prophetic clock. The Bible describes the temple as the earthly throne of God, a physical portal between spiritual and material dimensions, where the veil between heaven and earth becomes thinner. This esoteric understanding of the temple explains why its reconstruction is not just an architectural project, but an event of universal significance. The scriptural details about the temple are not mere construction instructions. They are precise mathematical formulas that establish specific vibratory harmonies. The golden proportions, exact dimensions, and prescribed materials create a divine instrument, calibrated to resonate with celestial frequencies. The Temple Institute is not just recreating material objects, but reconstituting an ancient spiritual technology. Each temple utensil is created according to exact measurements and specific materials that act as amplifiers of divine energy. The controversy over the Temple Mount goes far beyond geopolitics. Esoteric scholars point out that this specific site is located at an intersection of planetary energy lines, what the ancients called the navel of the Earth. Esoterically, it is believed that this precise geographical location is not arbitrary, but corresponds to a point where dimensional barriers are naturally thinner. This explains why three religions fiercely dispute this specific site. All intuitively sense its power, even without fully understanding its nature. What few openly discuss is the question: who is really funding these preparations? Recent investigations reveal surprising connections between American evangelical organizations, Russian oligarchs, and Jewish philanthropists who, despite ideological differences, converge on this single purpose. Some speculate that global elites understand the prophetic significance of the temple and consciously seek to accelerate apocalyptic events. Others see a divine synchronicity aligning seemingly disconnected pieces for a greater purpose, as if an invisible hand were moving the players on the global board. While the world debates peace in the Middle East, few understand that the temple is simultaneously the key to peace and to the final conflict. The Qumran scrolls, discovered in 1947, contain previously unknown details about the eschatological function of the Third Temple. In them, the temple is described not just as a physical building, but as a temporal vortex that will accelerate prophesied events. An esoteric interpretation of these texts suggests that the construction of the temple not only precedes the Messiah, it literally invokes him, as if the building functioned as a cosmic calling device. The political implications are unavoidable. Once the construction of the temple begins, a conflict of biblical proportions becomes inevitable. Scholars of Middle East geopolitics point out that any attempt to build the temple where the Dome of the Rock stands today could trigger a regional or even world war. Ironically, some rabbis believe that this conflict is necessary and predestined, part of the painful birth that will precede the Messianic era. Have you considered the possibility that this conflict is not an obstacle to the construction of the temple, but an integral part of its prophetic function? Recent archaeological discoveries beneath the Temple Mount reveal a complex system of tunnels and chambers dating from the period of the First Temple. In 2019, researchers using penetrating radar technology identified what they believe to be the Ark of the Covenant, Judaism's most sacred object, missing for 2,600 years. The exact location is kept secret, but sources close to the project suggest that plans already exist for its recovery when the time is right. The revelation of the Ark would, by itself, be an event of apocalyptic significance that would instantly transform global religious dynamics. The parallels with ancient purification rites are fascinating. In Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and even Vedic traditions, we find references to sacred heifers as vehicles of divine purification. The esoteric significance of the red heifer transcends Judaism. It represents the feminine principle of creation that must be sacrificed for a new cosmic order to emerge. This alchemical symbolism of the transformation of red, blood/matter, into purifying ashes, spirit, reflects processes of spiritual transmutation found in various mystical traditions around the world. The recreation of the temple's musical instruments reveals another little discussed aspect, the sound technology of the Levites. Ancient Kabbalistic texts describe how certain sequences of musical notes, played with specific instruments, could open dimensional portals. Levite musicians were not mere artists, they were operators of a sophisticated sound science. Today, musicians trained by the Temple Institute are relearning these ancient melodies, whose frequencies, according to sacred acoustics experts, possess vibrational properties capable of altering states of collective consciousness. The most transformative aspect of the Third Temple is not its physical structure, but what it represents: the return to a direct spiritual paradigm, without intermediaries. In a world increasingly virtual and disconnected from the sacred, the temple represents a radical return to the direct experience of the divine. Perhaps this is the true esoteric meaning of this prophecy. In an era of digital simulacra and artificial realities, the temple offers authentic contact with the transcendent. While many expect apocalyptic catastrophes, few understand that the true function of the temple may be to reconcile humanity and divinity, not through destruction, but through a fundamental transformation of human consciousness. In the shadows of the great apocalyptic prophecies, there exists an apparently minor sign, almost forgotten by most modern scholars, but which occupies a central place in the prophetic unfolding: the red heifer. In Numbers chapter 19, we find meticulous instructions for a strange and mysterious ritual. A perfectly red heifer, without a single hair of another color, without defects, and that has never carried a yoke, must be sacrificed and reduced to ashes. These ashes are then mixed with water to create the Mei Nida, the water of purification, essential to consecrate the temple and its priests. Without this purifying element, the temple cannot function according to divine laws. During the era of the First and Second Temples, this ritual was performed only 9 times in Jewish history. Rabbinical tradition affirms that the 10th red heifer is reserved for the Messianic era, our era. For almost 2 millennia, this ritual remained in the realm of theory, an obscure detail of Mosaic law studied only by rabbis and scholars. However, what makes this sign so extraordinary is its extreme statistical improbability. Geneticists estimate that the probability of birth of a heifer that meets all biblical criteria is less than 1 in several hundred million, practically a statistical impossibility. Throughout history, there have been numerous attempts to produce a perfect red heifer. In the 12th century, Maimonides documented efforts to create such animals through careful selection. In the 17th century, European rabbis established farms dedicated exclusively to this purpose. In the early 20th century, religious farmers in Israel attempted selective crossbreeding, all without success. The specificity of biblical requirements, the uniform color, the total absence of defects, made this search almost impossible. Even 2 white hairs on the heifer would completely disqualify it. The fascination with this ritual transcends Judaism. Ancient Egyptian texts mention the sacrifice of red oxen for purification. In Vedic India, the red cow was considered sacred and associated with the goddess Aditi, cosmic mother. In Zoroastrian traditions, we find references to a red ox whose sacrifice preceded cosmic renewal. This recurring pattern suggests a universal archetype, as if multiple traditions captured fragments of a primordial truth about the relationship between blood, purification, and cosmic transformation. The truly revolutionary aspect of the appearance of red heifers in 2022 was not just the event itself, but the circumstances surrounding it. Why now, after 2,000 years? And why through the collaboration between American evangelical Christians and Israeli Orthodox Jews? These heifers were not born by chance. They were the result of a meticulous genetic project using advanced selective breeding techniques. Modern science was placed at the service of an ancient prophecy, creating an unlikely bridge between contemporary technology and millennial sacred texts. Rabbinical tradition teaches that Moses prepared the ashes of the first red heifer, and that part of these ashes was preserved and mixed with each new preparation throughout history. If this tradition is true, the ashes of the 10th heifer will contain particles of the ashes prepared by Moses himself, a direct material continuity with the Exodus. This perspective transforms the current heifers into a physical link with foundational events of the biblical narrative, creating a literal bridge through time that connects our era with the formative moment of divine revelation. What few realize is that the red heifer ritual contains profound alchemical symbolism. The process of transforming a living red animal into purifying white ashes mirrors the alchemical concept of rubido, the red phase that precedes perfection. In spiritual alchemy, red represents blood, the raw material of life, which must be transmuted through sacrificial fire to achieve final purification. This esoteric reading suggests that the ritual is not just a religious ceremony, but a transformative process that operates simultaneously on the material and spiritual planes. Medieval Kabbalistic texts, particularly the Zohar, offer an even deeper interpretation. They associate the red heifer with the Shekinah, the feminine presence of God that was exiled along with Israel. The sacrifice represents the painful process through which the feminine divine dimension is released from its material incarnation to be reunited with its masculine counterpart. This cosmic reunification, the divine zivug, is seen as a precondition for universal redemption. In this mystical perspective, the red heifer is not just a sacrificial animal, but a vehicle for the restoration of primordial harmony. The timing of this event is particularly significant when viewed through the lens of ancient astronomy. In September 2022, when the heifers arrived in Israel, a rare planetary alignment occurred that, according to biblical astrologers, precisely mirrors the celestial configuration described in Revelation 12, the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars. This synchronicity between terrestrial events and celestial configurations follows a recognizable pattern in other prophetic moments of biblical history, such as the stellar alignment at the birth of Jesus. The scientific community's reaction to the red heifer phenomenon illustrates the clash between modern and ancient paradigms. Geneticists have confirmed that naturally producing animals with the required characteristics is practically impossible. Some suggest that the biblical specification of a perfectly red heifer may refer to an extremely rare genetic mutation, possibly a bovine version of erythrism, a condition that causes abnormal red coloration. The fact that such animals have emerged now, through advanced genetic technology, raises fascinating questions about the intersection between modern science and ancient prophecy. Beyond religious symbolism, the red heifers represent a profound temporal paradox. An apparently archaic and primitive element, animal sacrifice, becomes the catalyst for futuristic events of cosmic proportion. This collapse of temporal linearity, where past and future fold upon each other, is characteristic of genuinely apocalyptic moments. The term apocalypse means revelation, an unveiling where the hidden patterns of history suddenly become visible. The red heifers, in their statistically impossible rarity, serve as a tangible sign that we are entering a time where the normal laws of probability and causality begin to give way to a deeper logic, the logic of prophetic revelation. The Mount of Olives rises silently east of Jerusalem, a modest elevation of only 820 meters that, to uninformed eyes, might seem insignificant. However, this specific place carries a prophetic weight that transcends its physical appearance. While the world discusses the temple and its surroundings, few understand that the true epicenter of the divine return is not the Temple Mount, but this adjacent hill. Zechariah chapter 14 verse 4 is explicit. On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two. This is not a symbolic or metaphorical location. It is a precise geographical coordinate for the greatest event in human history. Sacred geography reveals hidden patterns. The Mount of Olives forms a perfect triad with the Temple Mount and Mount Zion, creating an energetic triangle that, seen from above, aligns with specific constellations. Ancient esoteric texts suggest that these three mounts function as a cosmic antenna, a system for receiving and transmitting divine energies. The Temple Mount represents earthly manifestation, Mount Zion symbolizes spiritual presence, and the Mount of Olives serves as a dimensional portal, the exact point where celestial and terrestrial realities meet and interact. History records that Jesus chose this mount for his most transcendent moments. It was here that he taught the Beatitudes, prophesied the destruction of Jerusalem, wept over the city, and revealed to the disciples the signs of the end times. It was in the Garden of Gethsemane, at the base of this mountain, that he suffered his agony before crucifixion. And it was at the top of this mount that he ascended to heaven after his resurrection, with the implicit promise that he would return in the same manner. The pattern is clear. The Mount of Olives is not just a setting for historical events, but a nexus where the divine and human intertwine in a unique way. What most tourists who visit the site do not realize is the extraordinary scientific confirmation of biblical prophecies. Geological studies confirm that the Mount of Olives is situated directly on the Dead Sea Fault, one of the most active on the planet. This seismic fault, which extends for 1,500 kilometers from northern Syria to Central Africa, creates precisely the conditions for the mount to literally split in two during a major earthquake. In 2021, Seismologists from the Hebrew University documented a significant increase in tectonic activity in this specific region. Modern science is, involuntarily, confirming the prophetic accuracy of texts written 2,500 years ago. The topography of the mount reveals another fascinating detail. If it splits as prophesied from east to west, it would instantly create a valley connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Dead Sea. Hydrological studies indicate that such an event would radically transform the region's ecosystem, potentially reversing the extreme salinity of the Dead Sea and restoring fertility to the Jordan Valley. Ezekiel chapter 47 describes waters flowing from the temple to the Dead Sea, bringing life where there was only desolation before. The splitting of the Mount of Olives would be the geological mechanism that would make precisely this phenomenon possible. The symbolism is profound. The divine return not only transforms spiritual realities but literally reconfigures the physical topography of the earth. Jewish esoteric traditions, particularly Lurianic Kabbalah, interpret the Mount of Olives as the site where the final tikkun olam, the cosmic repair of the world, will occur. The Hebrew term zaytim, olives, shares a root with tzaddikim, the righteous, suggesting that this mount represents the point where the righteous of all ages will gather. Olive oil, the product of olives, symbolizes spiritual enlightenment and divine anointing. Thus, the very name of the mount encodes its function, a place where divine anointing will be poured upon humanity at the moment of universal restoration. Few know the modern history of this sacred site. Between 1948 and 1967, when East Jerusalem was under Jordanian control, the Jewish cemetery on the Mount of Olives, the oldest in the world still in use, was severely desecrated. More than 38,000 tombs were destroyed, and tombstones were used to build roads and military latrines. Since the Israeli recapture in 1967, a meticulous restoration project was initiated. Many see in this desecration and subsequent restoration a prophetic parallel with Israel's own destiny: destruction, exile, and restoration. The fact that this specific site has experienced this cycle of destruction and renewal seems to set the stage for its apocalyptic function. Islamic traditions also recognize the eschatological importance of the Mount of Olives, albeit with different interpretations. Muslim texts speak of a thin thread that will be stretched from the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives during the final judgment. The righteous will be able to cross this thread, while the unrighteous will fall into the valley of Hinnom below. This convergence of eschatological expectations among often hostile traditions suggests a shared perception of the unique sanctity of this site. Even those who disagree about the identity of the Messiah agree on the central role of this mount in the final events, a remarkable concordance that transcends millennial religious divisions. The Mount of Olives today houses a curious combination of sacred sites, cemeteries of 3 religions, modern hotels, and scientific institutions. At the top of the Mount of Olives Study Center constantly monitors the seismic activity of the region. Alongside, ancient churches mark supposed sites of Jesus' ascension. At the base, the Garden of Gethsemane preserves olive trees that possibly date from the time of Christ. This juxtaposition of modern science, ancient spirituality, and everyday life creates a microcosm of the human condition, suspended between the mundane and the transcendent, between prophetic past and apocalyptic future, between death, cemeteries, and the promise of renewed life, perennial olive trees. An aspect rarely discussed is the numerical and geometric significance of the Mount of Olives. Its elevation of 820 meters above sea level corresponds to the Hebrew numerical value of the letters that form eternal love. Its exact distance from the Holy of Holies, the most sacred point of the ancient temple, is 1,968 meters, corresponding precisely to the year 1968, when Jerusalem was reunified after the Six-Day War. These numerical coincidences are seen by scholars of Hebrew gematria as divine encodings in the very physical terrain of Jerusalem, as if the topography were a form of sacred language that communicates hidden truths to those who know how to interpret it. When Jesus returns to the Mount of Olives, he will not simply be returning to a geographically convenient location. He will be completing a cosmic circuit, closing a circle that began with his ascension. Quantum physics teaches us that certain particles maintain instantaneous connections regardless of the physical distance separating them, the phenomenon known as quantum entanglement. Similarly, the Mount of Olives maintains a spiritual entanglement with the celestial realm since the moment of Jesus' ascension. It is as if a dimensional door had been opened and kept in a latent state for 2 millennia, awaiting the predetermined moment to fully reactivate. The return will not just be a historical or religious event, but a fundamental reconnection between dimensions of reality that were separated, a religare in the most literal and cosmic sense of the term. We are witnessing an unprecedented acceleration in global events. If chapters of human history once unfolded over centuries, they now seem to compress into years, months, even weeks. This acceleration is not just a subjective impression. It is a quantifiable phenomenon. In 2010, Google CEO Eric Schmidt observed, "We now generate more information every 2 days than we created from the beginning of civilization until 2003. This temporal compression is itself a prophetic sign. Daniel chapter 12 verse 4 predicted, "Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase." A precise description of our era of hyperconnectivity and information overload. Current geopolitical patterns reveal configurations precisely aligned with ancient prophecies. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 describes a specific coalition of nations that will rise against Israel in the final days, led by a power from the far north, Rosh/Russia, including Persia, Iran, Kush, Sudan/Ethiopia, Put, Libya, and Gomer, parts of Eastern Europe/Turkey. For the first time in history, we are seeing exactly this coalition forming. The Russia-Iran Strategic Agreement of 2021, the normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia in 2023, and Israel's growing diplomatic isolation compose a picture that mirrors with disturbing precision the prophetic scenario. The convergence of global crises transcends statistical coincidences. Since 2020, we have simultaneously faced global pandemic, systemic economic instability, intensification of regional conflicts, unprecedented climate extremes, emerging food shortages, and acute social polarization. Jesus described this pattern in Luke chapter 21 verses 10 and 11. "Nation will rise against nation. There will be great earthquakes, famines and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven." The crucial aspect here is not the individual existence of these events. There have always been wars and disasters, but their simultaneous convergence and global intensification, creating what mathematicians would call a systemic singularity. Modern technology is inadvertently fulfilling specific prophecies. Revelation chapter 13 verses 16 and 17 describes a system where no one can buy or sell without the mark of the beast. For millennia, this scenario seemed technologically impossible. How could one implement a global system of commercial control? Today, with blockchain, biometric identification, centralized digital currencies, CBDCs, and Internet of Things, IoT, such a system is not only viable, it is being actively developed. The World Economic Forum explicitly promotes a future where financial transactions will require verified digital identity. We are not suggesting specific apocalyptic identifications, merely observing how the technical infrastructure for the literal fulfillment of these prophecies exists for the first time in history. The manifestation of unusual celestial phenomena intensifies. In December 2020, the Great Conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn occurred, the closest in 800 years, creating what appeared to be an exceptionally bright star. In 2023, we had the rare Comet C/2022 E3, ZTF, visible to the naked eye after 50,000 years. April 2024 witnessed a total solar eclipse precisely crossing the United States, exactly 7 years after another similar eclipse in 2017, forming a cross over American territory. In ancient cultures, planetary conjunctions, comets, and eclipses were seen as celestial language, divine signs announcing imminent transformations. Jesus stated, "There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars." Luke chapter 21 verse 25. Persecution of Christians has reached unprecedented levels in recent history. According to the World Watch List 2023, more than 360 million Christians face high levels of persecution and discrimination for their faith, a 20% increase compared to 5 years ago. In Nigeria, China, India, North Korea, and parts of the Middle East, Christians face systematic violence, imprisonment, and even execution. The crucial prophetic aspect is that this persecution occurs simultaneously with the greatest dissemination of the gospel in history. Bible translations exist in 3,495 languages, covering 7 billion people, 90% of the world's population. This juxtaposition of maximum persecution and maximum propagation precisely fulfills Jesus' prediction in Matthew chapter 24. The resurgence of paganism and occultism represents another significant prophetic sign. Paul warned that in the last days many would abandon the faith, following deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 1. What we observe today is not mere secularism, but an active reorientation toward alternative spiritualities. Neopaganism is the fastest-growing religious segment in the United States and Europe. Ancient rituals are being revived in public spaces, from the opening ceremony of the St. Gotthard Tunnel in Switzerland in 2016 to the recent Burning Man, which incorporates explicit elements of pagan cults. This movement does not represent mere cultural diversity, but a spiritual realignment that precisely reflects the prophetic patterns of apostasy in the end times. Global ecological transformation presents apocalyptic dimensions rarely discussed. Revelation chapter 8 verse 9 predicts that a third of the living creatures in the sea died. According to a 2022 WWF report, global marine populations have declined 49% since 1970. Revelation also describes rivers becoming like blood, an image that finds disturbing parallels in red tide phenomena that have increased 40% globally in the last decade. Extreme climate events occur with unprecedented frequency and intensity. 2023 was the hottest year on record. These ecological transformations are not just environmental crises, but prophetic signs of an Earth system approaching what scientists call tipping points, and what apocalyptic texts call the birth pains of the new creation. The emergence of artificial intelligence introduces a totally new prophetic element. Revelation chapter 13 describes an image of the beast that gains the ability to speak and causes those who would not worship it to be killed. For millennia, the concept of an image that could speak and interact seemed purely metaphorical. Today, generative AI systems like GPT-4 and Claude can converse fluently, generate convincing images, manipulate perceptions, and potentially influence behaviors on a global scale. The director of OpenAI suggested that advanced AIs could represent the greatest existential risk to humanity. The technological singularity, the point where AI would surpass human intelligence, may represent an unexpected dimension of prophetic fulfillment, where the speaking image emerges not from ancient pagan rituals, but from advanced algorithms. Transformations in human identity represent the deepest dimension of the signs of the times. We are witnessing a fundamental redefinition of what it means to be human, from genetic editing, CRISPR, to brain-machine interfaces, Neuralink, transhumanism, and immersive virtual realities. This dissolution of boundaries between human/machine, real/virtual, natural/artificial reflects an unprecedented ontological crisis. Philosopher Yuval Harari observes that we are becoming gods with the capacity to design life, while simultaneously questioning foundations of human identity. This paradox, technological deification coexisting with identity fragmentation, precisely mirrors the apocalyptic tension between the image of the beast, false transcendence, and the authentic image of God, for which we were created. The convergence of these signs does not represent statistical coincidence, but a synchronized orchestration that transcends purely materialistic explanations. As theoretical physicist John Polkinghorne wrote, when patterns of seemingly disconnected events begin to converge into meaningful configurations, we are witnessing not statistical chaos, but syntax, the rudiments of a language through which the transcendent communicates with the immanent. The signs of the times are not just indicators of an end, but hieroglyphs of a new beginning, a cosmic birth where contractions increase in frequency and intensity before the birth. The question that remains is not whether the signs are present, they clearly are, but whether we have discernment to interpret them and wisdom to respond appropriately. The return of Jesus will not be a subtle, discreet, or ambiguous event. Revelation chapter 1 verse 7 is explicit. Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. Unlike his first coming, humble, in a manger, recognized only by a few, his return will be universally visible, indisputable, and transformative in its magnitude. Matthew chapter 24 verse 27 compares it to lightning that comes from the east and flashes to the west. It will not be a local event, transmitted by media, but a cosmic occurrence that will transcend geographical boundaries and perceptive barriers. Every human being, in every corner of the planet, will simultaneously witness this supernatural manifestation. The nature of this return has been misunderstood by many religious traditions. We are not talking about an ethereal, purely spiritual, or metaphorical manifestation. The Greek text of the New Testament uses the word parousia, a term that indicated the physical visit of an emperor or authority to a province. The first Christians understood this literally. The same Jesus who physically ascended will physically return. Acts chapter 1 verse 11 records the angelic promise. This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. The specificity of the location, the Mount of Olives, and the nature of the event, visible, physical, tangible, are crucial to distinguish the authentic return from the false manifestations that will precede it. Discernment will be vital in the days preceding the return. Jesus repeatedly warned about false messiahs and false manifestations. If anyone tells you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "There he is," do not believe it. Matthew chapter 24 verse 23. The final deception will be so sophisticated, so convincing, that, if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived. Matthew chapter 24 verse 24. This warning gains new relevance in our era of augmented reality, deepfakes, and advanced holograms. Current technologies already allow the creation of three-dimensional simulations indistinguishable from reality, including apparent miracles. The true return will transcend any possibility of technological manipulation. It will be an event that will reconfigure the very laws of physics and reality. Authentic preparation for this event does not involve underground bunkers, stockpiles of supplies, or remote refuges. Jesus explicitly discourages such materialistic measures. Remember Lot's wife, Luke chapter 17 verse 32, who looked back, attached to material possessions. True preparation is primarily spiritual and internal. It is no coincidence that the parable of the 10 virgins, Matthew chapter 25, uses the metaphor of oil in lamps. In the esoteric tradition, oil has always symbolized inner spiritual development, invisible to external eyes, impossible to transfer or borrow at the last minute, and absolutely essential to illuminate the path in the darkest hours. The transformation that accompanies the return will be simultaneous and multidimensional. Paul describes, "In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed." 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 52. This transformation will not be merely spiritual, but physical. The raw material of reality will be reconfigured into a transcendent state that Paul calls a glorified body. Theoretical physicist Frank Tipler, in his book, The Physics of Immortality, proposes that such a transformation would require a quantum reconfiguration of the entire structure of spacetime, an event that would simultaneously fulfill religious prophecies and represent the apex of cosmic evolution. Different religious traditions offer complementary perspectives on this culminating event. Judaism awaits the Messianic era where the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Isaiah chapter 11 verse 9. Islam awaits the return of Isa, Jesus, who, according to hadiths, will break the cross, symbolically refuting religious dogmas that have distorted his original message. Eastern traditions speak of the era of Maitreya, a period of elevated consciousness and universal harmony. Even indigenous traditions like the Hopi predict the return of the true white brother, who will bring planetary transformation. This cross-cultural convergence suggests a universal archetype imprinted in human collective consciousness, as if all traditions captured fragments of the same transcendent truth. The effects of the return will be paradoxically both unifying and dividing. Jesus uses agricultural metaphors of separating the wheat from the tares and final harvest to describe this process. This will not be a division based on external religious affiliations, wealth, status, or power criteria by which humans typically judge one another. The separation will occur on a much more fundamental level, between those who have developed an inner capacity to resonate with divine frequencies and those who have not. As Matthew chapter 25 explains in the parable of the sheep and goats, the final criterion will be our capacity to recognize and respond to the divine presence manifested in the least of these, the marginalized, suffering, and despised. The planetary transformation that will follow the return is vividly described in Revelation chapters 21 and 22. "I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." This will not be an annihilating destruction, but an alchemical transformation, just as gold emerges from or through purifying fire. The New Jerusalem that comes down from heaven represents the fusion of the divine with the earthly, the cosmic marriage between spirit and matter that the alchemists called the sacred conjunction. Rivers of living water will flow from this city, and trees whose leaves are for the healing of the nations will grow abundantly. This symbolism transcends literalist interpretations and points to a complete ecological, spiritual, and social regeneration. The potential tragedy of this culminating moment is that many will be entirely unprepared, not for lack of warnings, but because they are absorbed in worldly concerns. Jesus compares this time to the days of Noah, where people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and took them all away. Matthew chapter 24 verses 38 and 39. The nature of this unpreparedness is not intellectual, but perceptual, an inability to discern evident signs due to existential distraction. Our era of perpetual entertainment, instant gratification, and information overload creates precisely the conditions for such collective blindness. Absorbed in secondary narratives, we lose the ability to perceive the meta-narrative that is unfolding. The final moment of human history will not be the end, but the true beginning. Philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin described it as the omega point, the teleological culmination toward which all cosmic evolution converges. C.S. Lewis suggested that all of human history up to this point will be merely the cover and title page. The real book will only begin. This perspective radically redefines our understanding of time and purpose. We are not living the final chapters of a declining story, but the preparatory moments of an infinitely more glorious story about to begin. The return does not mark an apocalyptic end, but an evolutionary transformation. The chrysalis finally opening to reveal the cosmic butterfly destined to fly in dimensions of existence that we are only beginning to glimpse. The true test of prophetic wisdom is not our ability to predict specific dates. Jesus explicitly discourages such speculation, but our willingness to live each day as if it were simultaneously the last day of the old order and the first day of the new. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. This phrase, repeated by Jesus, does not refer to physical hearing, but to the inner capacity to resonate with transcendent truths. In the final times, this capacity will become the most valuable human quality, more precious than gold, rarer than diamonds. The awakening of this inner perception, this attunement to divine frequencies, is the true preparation for the great return. Not a preparation of fear or escapism, but of deep joy and anticipation, like a bride awaiting the bridegroom, like parched soil awaiting rain, like the dark night awaiting the sunrise. What we witness today is not a random set of events, but the orchestrated convergence of millennial prophecies unfolding with impressive precision. As the pace of events accelerates and the signs multiply, we are invited not to fear or passivity, but to conscious awakening, to a lucid participation in the greatest moment of transformation in human history. Prophetic knowledge was not given to us to satisfy intellectual curiosity, but to inwardly prepare us for the extraordinary times we are destined to live. Each revelation, each sign, each promise represents a call to spiritual deepening, sharpened discernment, and personal transformation. As the world approaches the culminating moment of the divine return, true wisdom lies in cultivating that inner light which, like the oil in the lamps of the wise virgins, will allow us not only to witness, but to fully participate in the new dawn that approaches. If you are interested in exploring more about spirituality, I have specially selected for you some videos full of profound knowledge and fascinating discoveries that you will love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step to transform your reality.